Welcome to your interview, David. I'm really excited to do this. Let's start with a few questions about how you were inspired to write the book.
Okay.
So, David, what inspired you to write Hank, an Angel Dog?
Well, I've had a number of dogs throughout my life, and so had my father-in-law, he and his wife. In fact, they were farmers they lived up in Council Bluff, Iowa, and we live in Texas, and I've been here for about 30 years since I retired from the Air Force. And we've always had dogs. But what happened was when my mother-in-law passed away. My father-in-law didn't have a dog at that particular time, and so we went looking for a dog, and we actually got this rescue dog from over in the Omaha rescue kennels, and his name, well, we named him later, but he was about 6 to 8 months old when we got him. And the thing about it, what inspired me to write the book was because when we got Hank, which we finally named him, uh, and actually got him on the day Mary, my mother-in-law, passed away. And so Hank became very important to Herman because we had kind of got him to comfort him during the loss of his wife. So when we got Hank, he was he was a remarkable special dog because I've never seen a dog with his temperament. He was he would never dig. He never chewed on anything. He never jumped on people like a puppy, like a 6 to 8 month old puppy would do when somebody came up. He never jumped on anybody. He never barked unless he was talking to his humans, trying to tell them something. And he was just, it seemed like he didn't need other dogs to play with or anything else. He was totally devoted, a loyal pet to his masters at the time. And so we got him home on that day that his wife passed away, and my wife kind of stayed up there for a while to help at the time, so he kind of get used to it. But the Hank then, or the dog, he actually stayed with Herman for he lived with him for like 5.5 years, and then when Herman got to the point where he had to go into a assisted living facility and he couldn't take care of Hank. And it just so happened one of the times we were visiting Hank, I told him that if you ever can't take care of Hank, we'd be glad to do it. And so sure enough, about the time that he decided he was going to have to go into an assisted living facility that wouldn't take pets, he called me and said, Dave, remember you said you would take care of Hank if I couldn't? And I said, oh yeah. And he says, well, the time is now that I need you to take care of Hank. So Herman had him for 5.5 years. I had him for 9.5 years. So essentially, he was 15 years and about 7 months because the vet said he was between 7 and 8 months when we got him. But he never acted like a puppy. And it was just, and he was that way. And he never got into anything. And it was just, something about him that I'd never seen a dog like that. So, and not only that, during his last year of life, he wound up getting stage 3 lymphoma. He got thyroid cancer and he had a stroke. And he overcame all of those things because of his strong will to live. And so he was just a remarkable dog, and just his temperament was just unbelievable. He would give anybody that would see him, they would get a smile on their face, and his little eyes, there was no evil look in the eyes. It was just love that came out of his little eyes and everything. So he was just a masterful dog.
Thank you for sharing that, David. You make me want to find me a Hank.
Yeah.
Can you share a little bit about the journey of writing this book?
Yeah. Since the first 5 chapters I thought was pretty easy because it was just a matter of going over all the different stories that Herman would tell when we would call about what Hank would do, and then the last 3 chapters is where he started coming into the problems with the cancer and everything. So it was easy. Like I say, the first 5 chapters weren't a problem, and then the last 3 it was somewhat difficult because as I would recollect some of the problems that we and obstacles that we ran into with Hank, uh, because it was one of those things that he was a member of the family. After 9.5 years with us, or 8 years at that time, he was one of our members of the family, and a very deep personal relationship between myself and my wife and him that occurred just like the member or the bond between Herman and Hank during the first 5 years. In fact, you can kind of see he was kind of a unique thing. But let me show you this. There's this uh, silhouette picture of Hank and Herman, and you can see just by their body language. Hank is looking up at him, like, "What do you want me to do, Daddy? Whatever you want, I'll do it." And then Herman just looking down at him, saying, "Yeah, Hank, we're together. You're my pet, you're my buddy and companion." And so that just kind of shows the kind of bond that all of us developed with him, because there wasn't a day that went by that he didn't cause a smile to come to our faces, or really a smile on our hearts. And it was such that all this occurred. It was always little things that he would do just daily. It was just remarkable. He was always doing something that normal dogs just don't do. And in fact, Herman, after he had had him for his 5.5 years, Herman had about probably 20 dogs over his life, and he lived on the farm, and he was really good with animals. He could train a dog to go out into the pasture and bring back a specific cow. And so he had the opportunity then to train Hank. So, and then Herman said, Dave, he says, "I think Hank is probably the smartest dog I ever had." And for Herman to say that was something. But I know that Hank was the smartest dog that I ever seen. So that was good. So and because of that, that's why I wanted to write the book. So it was good. But the last 3 chapters was a little tough, and that's why I'd say about 50% of the people who have read my book, they say they have to use Kleenex tissues, to get through the 3 chapters. So, which I think is good.
Well, I'll make sure to prepare my Kleenex and tissue once I get through the book. How did you come up with the title for the book?
Well, that's kind of unique. I remember when we got Hank, and he was, probably 95% white, uh, and so he was a white dog, but he had a black patch over his right eye, and he had little black spots on his ears like a Dalmatian. But he wasn't a Dalmatian; he was part uh, uh, bull or a boxer and some kind of a hunting dog. That's what our vet told us. But anyway, I had probably maybe 2 or 3 months before we got Hank, I had seen a movie on TV, and it was called Dancing with a White Dog. And it was about this elderly couple that lost his wife. And then the next day, this white dog showed up at this house. And I thought, well, that, it was almost like he was an angel dog, that came to see him. So I think the similarities between how we got Hank and that story, and it was a good movie, how that dog helped and comforted the individual that had lost his wife. And so I thought that just made a good uh, uh, title to come up with. So based on a movie almost.
Nice. Well, based on the stories that you're telling, I think it's also a good fit for who Hank is. And David, what message or theme do you hope readers take away from your book?
Well, for one thing, since Hank was a rescue dog, I think, and as I've talked to a number of people who've had rescue dogs, and they talk about how good they are and great, and how they really are a good companion. And I think that is an excuse me, an important lesson, that if you have an opportunity and need to get a dog, don't don't pass up the opportunity to get a rescued dog, because I think they know that you're helping them. And and Hank was just a prime example of it. Like I say, I I couldn't believe when anytime you'd see him, just when he'd look at you, you would just love coming out of his eyes as he was looking at you. So I want people to keep in mind, don't forget about the rescue dogs.
And how do you think Hank's present impacted your father-in-law after the passing of his wife?
Well, I think it was very, very dynamic the way that occurred, because when we got Hank, it soon became obvious that he had, during his first 6, 7 months, whatever it was, uh, he had obviously been abused by some male. Because what would happen anytime if a male would pick up a broom or a hoe or anything like that, something with a long handle, Hank would just cower down, just cower, and you could tell he was just scared to death. But he wouldn't do that for a woman. But for men, he would. You could tell he had stark fear of a man. And so when we found this out, or determined that, because when he just happened to pick up a broom one day and Hank just cowered down, uh, Herman decided that he was going to have to get that out of him. And I have never seen anybody get that kind of a fear out of a dog, uh, no matter how well they can train them. But what he did, for the first about 6, 7 weeks, every day, and his neighbor told us this, that every day Herman would go out in the backyard, put a broom on a shoulder or hoe or something like that, and walk Hank all around the backyard, letting Hank know that he wasn't going to get beaten. And it was about 5, 6 weeks, and then pretty soon Hank got to the point, well, he knew that Herman wasn't going to hurt him and everything. And so what Herman did, he reinstalled the trust into Hank and reestablished his self-esteem in the dog, because he didn't cower like that anytime when anybody came into the house or whatever. Uh, so Herman was able to get to do that, which what happened was then it gave, with the loss of his wife, Hank gave Herman a purpose for life. And so he just dwelt constantly on helping Hank. And the way what Hank, it was kind of neat from the standpoint that Herman always had an outdoor dog. He never had indoor dogs. Well, he started out, Hank was going to be an outdoor dog. He went out and bought him a dog house, put it in the backyard, some straw in there, because in Iowa it gets cold in the winter. And but Hank wouldn't use it. He'd just lay on the porch. And so Herman, when it was raining a little bit, he thought, well, I'll let him into the side porch. So he got into the side porch, and then he laid there and everything. And before long, Herman would see Hank out there, and he invited him into the kitchen. And so he got into the kitchen, and so then wasn't long, and he invited him into the living room so he could watch TV with him. And then before long, he went out and bought a pad so he could sleep in his room on a pad. So Hank totally won his heart over. And that's the way Hank was. And the thing about it, he wasn't boisterous or anything, but it was almost like, what do you want me to do, Daddy? I'll do it. And it just, he manipulates you that way. And so he won Herman over. And that is something, because he had never had an outdoor dog. And even when he went in the truck, he got so, Herman was taking him all the time when he would go places. And when he was on the farm, the dogs were lucky if they even got invited to go. And then they had to ride in the back in the truck bed, but not Hank. He got in the front seat with Herman. So off they went. So it was a real good fit between him. So it came down to Herman needed Hank and Hank needed Herman. And so that was a prime thing for Herman.
Well, it sounds like Hank was able to inch his way into the house.
Yeah, he does that on everything.
David, can you describe a specific moment or memory that stands out to you in Hank's journey?
Well, there's so many of them that, in fact, there was something he did every day that was notable. But you just, each one individually you wouldn't think too much about, but when you take the whole thing as a package, then you see how remarkable it is. But I would say that, they say that dogs don't have cognitive thinking, and I disagree with that, because Hank was very obvious. He always would watch the humans that he was with, and he keyed his actions off of whatever the humans were doing. And so he would watch us. Actually, I probably ought to give you something about one that I know Herman would classify as the thing. And what it was, Herman had thick glasses. He couldn't see very well. He had poor eyesight. He also didn't hear real well. And he also needed Hank to be his eyes and ears uh, around the house. And one day Herman was sleeping, and of course Hank would do whatever Herman was doing. So Hank was sleeping, and the doorbell rings, and Herman was always worried because Hank really didn't bark. And then this doorbell rang, and Herman didn't hear it, but Hank immediately was on all fours, barking loudly. So Herman goes to the door and opens up, and it was July. And Hank had been with Herman since May because we got him on the 24th of May. And at the door, there was these two, I would say, very unsavory type people at the door in long trench coats in July in Iowa, which is ridiculous. And Herman listened to him talk for a while and then said, "Oh, well, no, I'm really not interested." And so Herman was getting ready to close the door. And one of the guys, there was two of them, one of them stuck his foot in the door. And Hank saw that. And he had been sitting right behind Herman. And he came around that door, or around Herman, went out the door. These two guys saw Hank coming out. They took off running. Their trench coats were flopping in the breeze as they were running down the driveway. And Hank was right behind him, about 5, 6 feet. And Herman let Hank go there until he got to the end of the driveway. And he hollered, "Hank." And Hank immediately sat down and just watched him go away. So I think that was and then what Herman knew, that Hank was his eyes and ears. So that was probably the thing that Herman did during his first 5 years. And then with us, it was one day I was watching the uh, Olympics, and my wife was reading the Sunday paper. And in our house, in our family room, we have a couch, and then we have hardwood floors. So there was a long, one of those runner type rugs, so that when Hank wouldn't scar the floor with his paws. So we had a little bed at the end of the couch, and our chairs were at the far other end of the couch. And but what we and Hank, he had two types of voice. He had an indoor voice and an outdoor voice, and he used his outdoor voice with Herman. But a lot of times with us on the indoor voice, he would, if he wanted something, it was kind of funny. Herman always said that, well, because when we took him, when Herman gave him to us to take care of, I said, what, how will I know when he needs something? And Herman would always say, "He will let you know." And that's all he would say. Wouldn't tell me what I had to do or anything. But anyway, we were saying, I was watching the TV at Olympics. My wife was reading, and I always fed Hank and brushed him, and took him out and everything. But it was about 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Usually he'd eat about 3 or 4. And what you do, he'd get out of his little bed, walk down that runner rug, and then he would look at one of us and give us a little woof, and they just look at us. And then if it was, I'd look at the clock and say, "Well, you got to go eat." So I'd get up, and I thought, well, it's not 3 o'clock; it's 2, but maybe he wants to eat. So I got up, walked to the bedroom, because I let him out the door in the back, and uh, Hank turned around, walked down the rug, and got back in his bed. And I thought, well, I guess he doesn't have to do that. So I went back, sat down in the chair, watched the Olympics again, and about 4 or 5 minutes later, he gets up, comes down the rug again, looks at Jan, gives another little woof. And I thought, well, maybe just has to go potty. So I got up, started to do that. Same thing happened. He went back, got in his bed while I'm in the bedroom at the door trying to wait for him to come out. And so I came back out, sat down, and he stayed there for a little bit more. And he got up out of his bed, walked down the runner, looked right at Jan, and was kind of staring at it, and gave her a little bit louder woof. And then he looked over to the thermostat on the wall. And then Jan got the idea that he's hot. And so she got up, went over, turned the thermostat down so it would cool. And then Hank immediately went back and got in his bed. But he knew I never touched the the thermostat. So he knew in his mind that Jan was the only one that would take care of the temperature in the house. And so that's how he would convey to the individual, the human, what he wanted. And it was so remarkable to think that he knew that Jan ran the thermostat and then I didn't. So that always stood out in my mind and that showed me that's cognitive thinking, because he would watch us all the time and then he knew who did what. So I thought that was always pretty good.
Well, thank you for sharing these memories of Hank. Now, how did Hank bring comfort to your family after he could no longer live with his master?
Yeah, he did the same thing with us as he did with Herman. I mean, he was a total companion and total devotion and loyal, and he did the same thing with us. And in fact, it was kind of unique that on the day we picked him up, it was on Thanksgiving that we went up to Iowa to pick him up. Uh, Herman, when Herman came out, we were in the driveway getting ready to leave. I had a truck, so uh, we were going to get Hank in the truck to go, and then Herman told us that Hank was sitting right beside him, and he says, "Dave," he says, "I had a talk with Hank, so he knows he's going to go with you." And so I went over, opened up the door of the truck, said, "Come on, Hank." He ran over there, hopped in there, got in the back seat, and Herman was at the front of the truck. It was such a hard moment for him that all he could do was just look down at the ground and just knowing that he was going to lose Hank. But I really think that Hank understood, because he got in that truck that had no problem about doing that. And then we came on to back to Texas. But he did the same thing with us. He watched everything that we did. He didn't, like I say, he didn't need other dogs like a lot of dogs do, and he would key his actions based on our actions, and he would know. In fact, we had to be careful with what we talked, what we'd say, because he knew the words, and if a word came up that he liked, like do you think we ought to go there? Hank would jump up, he'd head for the door because he was ready to go. So he was learning words, and then we had to start spelling words, and just all those little things like that just over time just accumulated. So he was just in he was just part of our family, and and it was good because Jan had retired then when we got Hank. So because Herman had been with him every day, Jan now was with him every day, and then when I retired, then I was with him every day. And that's all he needed. He didn't want anybody else. He just wanted to be with his humans.
And how did you approach balancing the emotional aspect of the story with the overall narrative?
Well, it was kind of hard. Like I say, the first 5 chapters wasn't a problem. I had no problem writing that, but the last three, because when we had gone through all his chemo and everything, and unfortunately, he was one of the dogs that uh, had bad reactions to the chemo, and he had to have 12 of them, and so it was tough because we had to help him all the time during there because he would get vomit and do that stuff. And he always felt bad when he would have an accident or anything. But so that was bad because I remember that. But that was the toughest part of writing those last three chapters. But there was no way that we weren't going to spend the money to help him. Because I'm sure there's a lot of people when the vet said that he has the third stage 3 lymphoma. Uh, that some of those people say, well, that's tough, and just not pay for the expense of treating the dog, but our vet says, but if we give him treatment, they average about 12 months after you start treatment. So we did. So, and we had all that. So we went through a kind of a rough time period there every time he had to have his chemo treatments. But so that was emotionally, that was kind of draining, but he was part of the family. There was no way we weren't going to pay for his treatment.
And can you share any challenges you faced while writing this book?
Well, I would probably say the biggest challenge was something from my standpoint, that I wanted to make sure that I did justice for Hank's memory. And so I always had that in the back of my mind. I want to make sure that I can get the stories out, all the little stories, so people could see they compiled into what a remarkable dog that he was. And so that was the biggest thing, was I wanted to make sure I would do justice to Hank for his memory.
And I'm pretty sure that you did. How did your background as a USAF officer and fighter pilot influence your writing?
Uh, well, it's probably the discipline that was instilled uh, with me or in me, because when you fly fighters, you have formation and everything like that. So you want to be precise on everything. And so that probably affected the way I write, because what we always looked at, if you start a new project, what you want to do is, first of all, get the goal, and then be a specific goal, not a too large or broad goal, not too narrow, and one that's attainable. And so then once you have that goal, then that's what you work for. And so every time I'd write something in the book, and the goal I had established for Hank was like in the dedication, that I dedicated this book to the memory of Hank, who God provided his comfort to us for 15 years, 7 months. So that was my goal. And so everything that I wrote was always oriented towards that goal. And so then I would check every time I would do something, make sure I had the goal in mind and didn't get off focus and come up with something crazy and miss my target.
And David, what made you decide to include the theme of divine intervention in Hank's story?
The Yeah, that was kind of neat. Uh, I'm religious, a very religious person, but uh, what happened? I ran across a book. It was by Friar Jack Wentz, and the name of the book was "I Will See You in Heaven," and it had pictures of dogs on the cover. So I bought that book, and as I read it, it was fascinating to me, because what Friar Wentz did, he got in provided biblical references to display that God always wanted us to have our pets in heaven. And then I got to thinking about, well, dogs are part of His total creation, and so it does make sense that He will also have our pets in heaven, because He provides them to us on earth. That we have them, and then so because of that, that's kind of how I thought. Well, I'm sure that Hank's life is being guided just like my life and my wife's life was being guided. And so that's why I have it that way, because it's the way I was raised.
And how did you gather or do your research about information for the book?
Of course, all the little stories and everything that I put in there uh, are just because they were so memorable to us. We remembered them, because all the little things he would do daily. And the same way with Herman. When Herman had him, and when we would talk to Herman, Herman would relate all the unique and unusual things that Hank would have done since the last time we talked. Then we would do the same. So we had a good inventory of all the stories to go in the book, uh, which is good. And we did have all of his medical records. That's why I could be very precise on all the things that happened to Hank, and the dates, the time periods. And so I had a very, very good, essentially encyclopedia of a year's worth of medical records on Hank. So it was easy to do it that way.
And what role does faith play in your own life, and how does it intersect with the story of Hank?
Yeah, as I said, my parents were. I was fortunate. I was raised in a religious family. So was Jan, with Herman and his wife Mary. So uh, being raised that way, I think is very beneficial. And when I was in Vietnam uh, as a forward air controller, the I know God had been guiding my life, and uh, it was during the offensive in '72. I was taxiing out, and this strange feeling came over me. Very strange. I never felt it anytime before that or even after that. But strange feeling came over me as I was taxiing out, good airplane, clear day. This voice in my head said, "Don't fly today." I taxied a little bit farther, and the voice says, "Don't fly today." And I got right at the end of the taxiway going for the and to get cleared onto the runway. He almost shouted at me. He says, "Don't fly today." And I thought, God's talking to me. So I turned around and went back. I didn't fly that day. And so, and I could see that instead of having coincidences in Hank's life, God was guiding him because he was available at the kennels on the day Herman went over there to check, and there was Hank, and he had gotten lost during a thunderstorm, and they only kept him back in those days like 3 days, and then they euthanized him. So, but he was there that day. So Hank, God provided Hank to be in the kennels when Herman needed him. Now that's not a coincidence, that's just the way it is, and even throughout other areas, like he was afraid of a lot of men, and we didn't have a vet when we got him, and we actually were going to A&M football games, and we ran into some of our friends, and we said, "Oh, we just got a new dog," told them a little bit about it, and they said, "Well, do you have a vet?" And we said, "No, don't." "Oh, we know a good one." So who talks about vets at a football game? But we did. God led us to that, and they gave us her name, and she was a woman. She graduated from A&M, and so it was a perfect fit. And she saved his life 3 different times. So I mean, she was perfect, and she knew what type of dog he was. And this is really unique, and because the first time we took Hank to her, the technician, of course, he was a pretty good sized dog, 60-pound dog. And we took us back to the exam room, and they put him on one of those stainless steel lifts, put a muzzle on him, strapped the muzzle to the ramp. And so they could be lifted up, and she walked in, looked at him, and she almost like she was indignant. He doesn't need that. Ripped that muzzle off, threw it on the ground, and from that point on, he said, Hank never did. You see another muzzle, So she knew, and so she was a female. She understood exactly the special dog that Hank was just by looking at him, and so because of that, I knew that God was guiding Hank's dog too.
Oh, that's a really great story. Thank you for sharing that, David. Do you have any upcoming projects or books you're working on?
Well, actually, this one right now, Hank, is one that I'm working on because I wrote that first. When I first wrote it, it was in 2015, and self-publishing authors don't have a real good chance a lot of times to market their books easily. So when an opportunity came to republish it, a company called me. I thought, well, shoot, I'll go ahead and try that because they have a different way of marketing now, like on the net and Facebook and all that kind of stuff. So I thought, well, that's worth a try. And then, like with Bookmarc helping me, taking it, doing this interview and going to the Frankfurt Book Festival. So I'm just in the process. I had republished Hank when Bookmarc called. But my second book that I wrote was about my time in Vietnam, and I knew that God had been guiding me because of all the things that happened and things that happened. In fact, I actually was in Vietnam twice. I was in when the C-5 crashed on Operation Baby Lift. At that time I was the lead structural engineer on the C-5 fleet for the Air Force. Well, I got assigned to the accident board, so I had to go over there and investigate that accident, and it occurred on 4 April 1975. And that country fell at the end on 30 April 75. I got out of Vietnam 3 days before it fell. So that's kind of critical. But anyway, that is, I decided that I'm going to redo my long return book. So because I wrote that in 2016, a year after I had written the Hank book, and because we weren't treated very well when we came back from Vietnam, so I literally shut down. But I did finally write The Long Return, and I did that in 2016, and that was therapeutic, just like writing Hank was therapeutic. So I'm doing that. So that's the projects I'm working on right now. I'm republishing those two books.
I'm excited for the second one. I really got to start reading the first one after doing this interview.
Yep.
Is there anything else you would like readers to know about Hank and Angel Dog?
Well, just that I think that the fact that they remember that he was a rescue dog, and they, please, if you want a dog and you want a good dog, consider going to get a rescue dog to save their lives, because it'll actually benefit your family and your life itself, because they're amazing dogs.
And as an experienced author, what advice would you give to new writers who are just starting their writing journey?
I would say write from the heart, because I think that's where you get the true impact. That you don't try to write something when you think, well, this sounds good or whatever, and it's not one of your original thoughts. You write it like you mean it from the heart, and I think that's probably the best thing. Don't try to blow smoke or embellish. Be truthful. Tell it like it is, and don't try to sugarcoat. Just try this. Especially if it's a true story, a nonfiction, be truthful and write from the heart.
That's one of the best advice I've ever heard. And David, could you share your personal experience working with Bookmarc Alliance and how it has impacted your publishing journey?
Yes, in fact, they were one of the companies that called and said, we would like to. Your book has a lot of potential. Evidently, that I guess on Amazon, a lot of people they have people that evaluate books and so forth, and they were saying that they've got a recommendation that Hank had a lot of potential, and to see about possibly republishing and doing the new marketing strategies now that's effective now than since it's 7-8 years later from when I first wrote it. So, and it's Bookmarc's given me that opportunity, and I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you, David. It was great learning a lot from your book. I'm really excited to continue reading it, and I hope to see you soon.
Sounds good. I appreciate that. Looking forward to meeting you.